Hey there, and welcome to the Lighthouse Church Sermon Broadcast. The title of today's message is The Two Yous. It appears from Scripture that Jesus made few friends from amongst the religious leaders of the time. He rebuked them on several occasions, particularly for their hypocrisy. These men evidently put on a really good show of being holy men of God, and they were honored by all of the people, but they did not live out the things that they taught. Here are two examples of those rebukes. Matthew chapter 23 and from verse 1, and I'll be reading from the New International Version today. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is for people to see. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to be called rabbi by others." And Matthew chapter 23 from verse 23. "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgent. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside also will be clean. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside, you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside, you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness." Ouch! This hypocrisy that Jesus was calling them out for was that they lived two lives, a public life and a private life. Their public life was extremely religious. They taught the law. They dressed in clothing that made them instantly recognizable as religious leaders. They were called by titles, rabbi or teacher. They were proud of their status in the community, and they loved the honor that came with that position. And many people believed that they were the holy, respectable men that they appeared to be. But their private lives were very different. They failed to live out major aspects of the law, like justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Sinful hearts hid underneath their beautiful clothing. Now, I'm sure you'll agree it's easy for us to criticize those Pharisees. But before we do, we really should examine our own lives. We too have public and private lives. There is a visible you or public you. That's the person that the people around you can see. There's also an invisible you or private you. That's the person that few people get to see, perhaps only God sees. Now, as I say this, I can imagine some of you thinking, hold on a moment, some things in my life are none of your business. And that's absolutely true. Some aspects of your life are deeply private, and that's really none of my business. That's not what this message is all about. The message is all about a problem that we can all develop. That problem is that a gap or a disconnect can develop between who we are in public and who we are in private. We can be one person in public and another person in private. In other words, we can appear to be what we are not. And God calls that hypocrisy. It's a real problem. It was a real problem then, and it's a real problem today. It's a real problem in any religious community, including the church. And it's a much more dangerous problem than we may think. Because this gap, this disconnect, can end up wrecking a marriage or a ministry. It can cause the people around us great pain. An extreme recent example of this is the recent confession of a highly respected man in Christian ministry. He had lived a double life for years, committing adultery in secret while he preached the ways of God in public. His wife is devastated, his church is devastated, and he's no longer in ministry. You may have heard similar stories. Highly respected people in ministry who either confessed to living a double life or it was exposed. We can ask in shock, how did that happen? I thought they were spiritual giants. The visible and the invisible were very different. They were disconnected. What was happening in private was very different from what was happening in public. Sooner or later, something has to give. Now, as I mention this, I can also imagine some of us thinking, thankfully, that'll never happen to me. Now, if you think that, listen to this warning from the Apostle Paul, 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 12. So, if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. If that scares you, it should. Living a double life is very, very dangerous. Now, I realize that so far this message sounds pretty negative. We're looking at the dangers of living a double life and the risk of falling. I've spoken about these things because it's a real problem and it can trip us up. So it needs to be spoken about. Friends, if you and I allow our lives, our private lives, to become the home of dirty little secrets, we are headed for big trouble. But now I want to turn this around and see how this principle can help us to have a greater impact on those around us and grow us in our ministry impact. And I'm sure we'd all like to see that. The principle is the same. It's this: the visible you and the invisible you need to grow, and they need to grow together. Now, the visible you is you, the Christian. It's the person who people see. It's you, the minister, when you minister to other people. The invisible you is you, the disciple of Jesus, your private world, your relationship with Jesus, and you're following him as your Lord. Both of these are real, and both of these need to grow. Invisibly, to most people, we need to grow as disciples of Jesus. Visibly, to those around us, we want to grow in our maturity, in our ministry impact. But those two yous can grow at different speeds. The invisible you may grow slowly because discipleship can be hard work. It can be challenging. It takes self-discipline. It requires effort and sacrifice. we may conclude that it's much easier to grow in the visible things, like attending meetings consistently, serving on a team, talking about spiritual things, having a position in the church, a function in the church. The key here is that we need to make sure that our invisible keeps up with our visible. Otherwise, we can fall into hypocrisy, and worse. If our invisible life is in bad shape, sooner or later, it will affect our visible life. So, you and I need to invest in the invisible you, the invisible me. Listen to these words of Jesus, Matthew chapter 6, 2-6 and 16-18. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners, to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Verse 16. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do. They disfigure their faces to show others that they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Here Jesus encourages his disciples to be invisibly spiritual rather than visibly religious. Give without telling anyone. Pray in private. Fast in private. Invest in your relationship with Jesus behind the scenes where no one notices. Instead of hiding secret sins, hide secret sacrifices. Now, as we do these things, we grow in our relationship with Jesus. We grow as disciples of Jesus. And we build a strong platform for ministry to others. As our private world grows stronger, it becomes a strong foundation for public ministry. So, do you want to be more effective for Jesus? Do you want to have a greater impact on your community and on the church? Then invest heavily on your private world. Know this: the height of a building is limited by the depth of its foundations. So dig deep, build strong foundations. Jesus taught about building strong foundations in a famous comparison. Matthew chapter 7 from verse 24. Therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. You and I can build strong foundations by paying attention to Jesus' words as we read them, as we hear them preached, and then putting them into practice. I fear that Far too many of us hear his words, but then we don't put them into practice. Our knowledge grows, but our lives don't change. And the result, friends, is a shaky foundation that can't withstand the storms of life. Every time a crisis comes, it's all fall down. So let's change the way that we read our Bibles and listen to sermons. As we read and listen, let's be asking Jesus to speak to us and to show us what we need to do in response to what he's saying to us. Many people have testified to the power of asking two simple but powerful questions as they read the Bible and listen to sermons. Question one is, what do I think Jesus is saying to me? And question two is, what am I doing about that? So what do I think Jesus is saying to me, and what am I doing about that? They are hearing Jesus' words and they're putting them into practice. They're building a solid foundation on Jesus. Their lives are being transformed. You know, this is so simple that some people are offended. It seems too simple to them. And it's also so hard that many don't do it because it requires too much effort. So friends, I encourage you today, build this discipline into your life. Read and listen and keep asking Jesus to speak to you. And keep putting his words into practice. Dig those foundations. Most of this will be invisible. Remember, you're growing the invisible you, the disciple of Jesus. But as the invisible you is transformed, the visible you will be transformed as well. And you will be able to minister more and more effectively for the Lord. Let me close with two visual illustrations. Sometimes it helps for us to see a picture. So here's the first. It's a picture of the two U's developing badly. Imagine two tracks that we're developing along. We're developing along the visible U and the public U. In this case, the visible you, the public you, is looking good. But the invisible you, the private you, is not doing well. You're doing some good things for the Lord, and visibly all seems well. But your private world is not well. Behind the scenes, you're indulging in things like selfishness, bitterness, unforgiveness, secret sins. You're neglecting spiritual disciplines such as prayer and Bible reading. Friends, this is very unhealthy. This is what we want to avoid. The second illustration is of the two U's developing well. The public U is faithfully serving, and the private U is quietly growing. Many invisible battles are being fought and won. Solid foundations that no one sees are quietly being dug and built. The Lord is slowly and surely developing strength of character in you that will qualify you for greater ministry impact. I trust that these pictures help you to see why our private world is so important. The invisible you is the foundation of the visible you. The invisible you is what positions you to stand strong when temptations come and when storms come. And it prepares a strong foundation for ministry. So let's invest in our private world. Let's mature as followers of Jesus. Let's position our hearts and our lives for greater things. Amen.